So hi, everyone. This is Alana James. I'm the founder and CEO of Doctoral Net Professional Development for graduate students. And today's topic is following directions or reviewer comments or committee standards. Each portion along the way has something worth thinking about. So our agenda is we're going to take the simplistic view and then the slightly tricky. And we'll see those two almost together. And then we'll go into complex and reviewers' comments. And then we'll go on to committees. So the graduate journey has many, many tricks to it when it comes to following directions. So the first snippet today is the simplistic view of following directions. Let me just say that this topic was requested by a graduate dean. And I thought when she asked me to please, she said, I just wish graduate students were better at following directions. And when she said that, I thought, oh, this is going to be a hard one, because I bet every graduate student thinks they follow directions just really well. After all, you have a successful history of undergraduate school where you followed a lot of directions and you got through and everything was fine. So probably a lot of people come to this conversation thinking, no brainer, it's just following directions. The simplistic view then is, this is taken from a website, listen carefully, think about what's being said, ask questions about anything you don't understand. It may be a skill that asking for help, or it may be a skill in asking a question that you need to develop, but not big ones. And then you repeat the instruction to the person, saying, okay, this is what I'm going to do step by step. And I should follow it and I should go on. And I think that's what people think of when we think of following directions. But today's conversation really is, this is just the baseline, and graduate school takes this baseline and just mixes it full of complex if-then statements. So let's take that a step further. We're going to go first into what I consider tricky directions. So let's consider a tricky direction. So you're in a class, whether a master's or a doctoral class, and you're given an assignment, but the teacher actually, or professor actually has two or three competencies, for those of you in competency-based education, 2 or 3 competencies come into this assignment. So being able to successfully do the assignment means you have to overcome or have each competency. And the first time you do anything, it's going to make you feel somewhat insecure because you haven't done it before. And if nothing else, we have that insecure moment when we are stepping out onto new territory. So a tricky set of assignments is a test. It becomes tricky to you personally because it's a test of your ability to do this new thing. And that new thing could be anything. It could be the teacher saying, okay, you're supposed to work in a group. And so then the whole group work dynamic becomes part of the test. Or it could be that the situation itself is complex. And we'll go into more levels of that in a minute. But and so you have to keep track of all the pieces. It could be complex because it requires something of you. So Adrian, who's in the room with us today, suggested that one of the things that makes this topic so very important to graduate students is that you'll get quick reviewer comments back, and you have to, there's a test there. So one reviewer comment she suggested that she has seen is more argumentation needed. Well, what do you do with that? Well, it's a test of whether or not you know what argumentation is. It's a test of whether or not you know, once you have an argument and you think you're clear on the argument, you have to figure out why the reviewer didn't think you were clear. So it's a test on what specificity will be needed to make it clear. And then it's a test of where you're going to put it in the document. So there's 4 or 5 different things that it will take the document to a place where it rises to the level of being a strong argument. So all of this means that your first test is actually a personal one. Your first test is your own self and how you handle insecurity. And we all have them, and we're all different. So if you get a little flutter in your stomach when you have to work in a group, then that's the test for you. And you might want to go do a little professional development about group work so you feel secure about that. If it's language and you don't understand the language, then the first test is finding it out. So that's what makes following directions tricky. And the test is always successful completion when it comes to graduate school. You're up for one thing that all these little things add up to, and that is graduation. All right, that's kind of an overview. Oh, I laid just some other ideas about what makes these things test. Every section of your research is a test. Putting it together in a coherent whole is the test for graduation. There will be within that layers of completion. So you might be asked to get some lit together, but is it your final lit review? Probably not. So layers and layers, iterative project management. Adrian says the first test then is that we must be always able to eat huge, humble pie. So actually it's 2 things, isn't it? That first human test. How do I handle my own insecurities? Can I grow past them? And once I'm pretty confident that I've done the right thing, can I be humble when somebody else makes me realize all the other things I could have done that I didn't think of doing? These may test your ability to make and defend decisions. And that too has Adrian's test in it of humble pie or not. There is such a thing as being too humble all the time, where you just go back and you try to do what other people want. We'll see that problem come up in a minute when we get to reviewer and committee directions. Because you can't just say, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am, because then the next thing you know, it's not your work anymore. And you're somewhere down some line that wasn't where you wanted to take it. And at the end of the day, it's your research going your direction. And this is a fine line that we'll be talking about. We'll have more about that in a minute. And then finally, there's these other 2 things called sequential or concurrent. Sometimes our directions are first you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. First you gather data, then you do this. But that's all well and good until you have a project where you have to do both things at once. You have to gather your data, and then you have to equally do other things, and you forget where you are and that kind of stuff. And Jane, I just muted you for a minute. You can unmute yourself. I was just getting rid of the typing noise. So those are just the basic questions. Now, what are your steps? And we'll come back to these steps. So rather than have simplistic steps of following directions like listen, ask, do, now we have complex kinds of things. So first you have to think not about the directions, not about the outcome, but about the test. How complex is it? Is it sequential or concurrent? How much of it is familiar? How much of it is new? And how much time have you got? So Adrian was passed a test. She was told to go get more argument. How complex is it? She didn't know. Sequential or concurrent? Probably concurrent. Probably she was going to learn about argumentation at the same time she was going to write about it. And the difficulty with concurrent tests is you always have to go back to the first part as you go along. How much of it is familiar versus new? This was all new, so therefore it threw her into whatever new throws her into. And then how much time have you got? Well, that depends on the particular moment. And I don't know in that case what it was. But those things, as you can see, if you think about some that you've had, how they play off of each other. And if you tear them apart, it is always my feeling that if we break things apart, we come to a place where we are more comfortable and we can move forward more comfortably. We don't think about the fact that it's a test, that it's complex, etc. We just can't try to keep doing it. We're like hitting our head against the same wall. And we're not even sure what the wall is. Okay, second part of this in completing tests is, remember, you can ask for help. So she could have said, I need to know more about argumentation. Which person do I know? Which librarian can I go to? What are the best resources for? And she's very good on the internet, but there are also other kinds of help we can ask for. And once you get somebody else telling you, in this case, argumentation has 3 or 4 steps, depending on how it's talked about, that becomes then less overwhelming. And then you know where the next bit of help you might need is. And then to realize that the trickier the test, the more important that you ask for assessment as you go along. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, argumentation is a pretty big topic. So you might go to someone else and say, how comfortable are you with arguments? If I just put these 4 sentences together, do they make a beginning argument? And you have a conversation about that before you spend however long it takes to write 4 pages of writing to make the argument strong. So I see this happen all the time with graduate students. They do way too much work based upon a faulty or fallacious understanding of the task. So test yourself, ask for little assessments as you go along, a huge possibility in helping you do this better. And then finally, if your assessment back is not 100%, then you go back to the beginning. Then you think about it as a step. Well, maybe it's more complex than you thought. Maybe you hadn't taken the sequential portions into account. Maybe there was stuff you thought you knew, but actually you were getting some kind of weird comments. And so maybe you don't know it as much as you think you know it. Calling the familiar into question is a huge portion of these really kind of mysterious reviewer comments that we're going to come to even more in a minute. So thank you, Adrian, for saying hello to people. Being open is more intellectual. Being humble is more emotional. Yeah, that's it. That's it. I think, Adrian, I think that is well said. Intellectually, I want to be open, and emotionally, I want to be not insecure, but humble. Humble enough that I know that no matter how much I know or how secure I am, there is more that I can do. Raise your hand if this is all making some kind of sense, because we're going to jump from here into the more complex areas. Helena, is this making sense for you? And if not, okay, good. Good. All right, we seem to be on a good start, so. Okay, the next snippet then is going to be how to properly address complex directions. So following directions is the conversation, and complex directions is the next. And we just thought about the test. We thought, oh, it might be complex. We've analyzed it. We've looked, we've pulled it apart. You've asked for help. And you've asked for little assessment as you went along. You're all starting again. Okay, that's the general thing about complex. And that's a general way of going forward. But what happens, what makes it complex? Well, it's complex because it has something that is understood probably and something that is not understood. Or so it hits you in a couple of different places. That's the most logical way to think about complexity. Another thing is it's complex because it's a lot to do in a short period of time, or it's complex because you have to pull from so many different resources. Keeping them all straight makes it complex. And so through this set of, go back a minute, through this set of things, you have the complexities brought about by time, by a variety of background sources, by maybe this is only one part of your life. And so the whole idea of going through graduate school is no longer sequential, but it's concurrent with bigger problems. And then that makes everything more complex. And when we get into complexity, then we have to be aware of the things that go with it. So I'm going to use reviewers' comments as my example of complexity, because they come from all of those. You're under time, you have many sources of them, etc. And sometimes you will experience them that they are not just complex, but they're obtuse. Where the heavens did that come from? So working with reviewers' comments all the time, I tend to break them into 4 different kinds. But remember that the complexity here is that your work is being held to an outsider's standards. Some of you may go to universities where there is a rubric, and the rubric says you're excellent if your work makes this box. It's okay if it makes this box. If it makes these last 2 boxes, then you're not so good. And that helps you at least have some level of being explicit to those outsider standards. The truth is, though, that rubrics are they're really different how we understand, meaning how the raters understand the standards. So those standards are not always explicit, and sometimes they're not explicit at all. For instance, going back to Adrienne's example, if she had been told beforehand by her supervisor that she had to build a good argument, and that was something she really explicitly was going to look for, Adrienne might have not written quite so much before she got that response. So there's several types of responses. Single statements. Needs more argumentation. That was a single statement. That was a complex single statement. Sometimes they are as simple as, don't do this or do that. Now, that has a danger to you. That danger is that you fall into the category of the student trying to please the teacher, and you just do what they say. And the trouble with that is you may find yourself doing what they say, doing what they say, doing what they say, until you have no idea anymore where you are going, because you followed their trail, and their trail was not explicit, and you ended up in the box canyon and you don't know how you got there. You may also feel, and I think Adrienne has brought this one up as well, at different times the same people may have different ideas. And that's what comes from the fact that this work, graduate work, research work, is iterative, and it is growing, and it is often asynchronous. So if you hand me the same document today that I read a year ago, I probably will not give you the same comments, because I'm a different place. And because I'm thinking different thoughts about the documents and about what's important. And because I've worked with 6 other students between now and then, and they had a different kind of problem. So now I'm finding it more helpful for you to think about something different than what I thought was helpful for you to think about a year ago. And we'll get to the whole thing of committees in a minute. And Helena is bringing up contradicting feedback from different supervisors who do not properly communicate with each other, puts you in a difficult situation. Helena, you can almost suggest that they never will communicate with each other. The only time supervisors or committee people will communicate with each other most of the time is when you are in the committee and when it's final defense stuff. So we'll talk about those, that particular difficult situation when we come to committees in just a moment. And different styles of feedback. I'm so glad everybody's in the room today is talking about, so styles of feedback. Single statements. Some people, in fact, their style of feedback is a question. Raise your hand if you're in the room and you've been up against that style of feedback, where the person asks questions. Aha. Where does that come from? Well, that comes from the fact that in the academic world, that's what we do to each other. So if we're in meetings, if professors go to meetings or we go to conferences, we very seldom say a single statement like, I think that's a fallacious structure, but we say, well, what about this, this, and this? Or have you thought about this? Or did you include that? Or we may just make them kind of open-ended questions. That's because that's the way we talk to each other. There will be professors who talk to students like that in review. Okay, it may be interesting, and it may take you into places you wouldn't have gone, and that's all good when you're in the development stage. But once you're pretty sure you know what you're doing, and you've had some indications that what you are doing is adequate to the directives of your university, being asked that kind of question will make you chase your tail. And I've had some people come to me after years of tail chasing because they worked with people who just didn't know any other way. They just asked questions forever. So it can make you less sure of what to do the next time. And we'll come back to that when it comes to committees in a minute. There also may be directives. People who say, I think you should do this here. And that's useful, and you can fix, quote unquote, the problem as they see it. But if you don't understand what problem they were trying to fix and question whether or not you agree that it's a problem, it may be that, in fact, what you had in your mind was pretty spot on. You just didn't say it very well. And you didn't say it well enough for them to see where you were going with it. So they gave you a directive that took you a different direction, when in fact the direction you were going would have been just fine if it had been more specific. That's really tough. And then the last one is, you may get the feeling that they are referring to a completely different playbook than yours. And you have no or little idea of what standards or what they mean. They just give you comments. So I'll take the people in the room to give me some examples or some feedback about which of these may be most difficult for them. And as you're typing, Helena has contradicting feedback from different supervisors who do not properly communicate with each other can make any one of these more complex, because you can be really chasing your tail when you're going for different people's suggestions. And Adrienne says in her case, her advisor always has the ultimate say. Actually, Adrienne, in Europe, that would be not at all the case. In a European school, the supervisor that you work with as a student is not even on your committee. When you go for your final defense, you're going for 3 people who have never seen your work before you turn it in. One of them is outside, and usually 2 of them are inside the university. And your supervisor may be in the room, but they can only take notes. They can't say anything. So different parts of the world, different structures as to who has the ultimate decision. Most parts of the world, the final decision is final defense or viva, and then they lay out what it is you want. And we'll talk about those challenges which are even more than these challenges in just a minute. Helena or Helena, I don't know which is your proper name. The committee, it makes it hard when feedback meeting end up being supervisors going against each other rather than guiding you forward. Yeah, that has to do with committee stuff as well. So we'll pull that apart a bit more later. Jane says she's had the experience at a previous institution. Two professors were philosophically on opposite sides and treat the meeting as an opportunity to debate their positions. Meanwhile, I was waiting for feedback on what you had presented. Wow, this is a fabulous conversation. It's just the kind of things I hoped we'd get into today. Oh, and then simple statements such as expand. I would say if you ever see the word expand, what they mean is get more specific. Tell us both sides of the story. Tell us the outliers as well as the main case that you're making. This happens frequently when a student is sort of beginning their work and they've got it down to something that's worth writing about, but they haven't lived with that topic for so long. They can expand on it. They can say, so I'll tell you about the weather, and maybe this is an example that will help. When I first moved to Ireland, everyone here talks about the weather first. And in the United States, you say, what do you do? And you talk about your work and you know something about other people's work. So you can have a conversation about work. But I didn't know how to have a conversation about weather. It was raining or it was sunny. And what do you do with that? So what I learned was that with weather, and this is probably true with most expansions, today it is a nice day. But last week, it was like this and this. The weatherman says it may be like this. And if we look forward, we might expect this compared to last year, which was like that. All right. So I think expansion generally means what came before, what came after, what's bigger than, what's less than, how they go together, and then tying it always back to the topic. Also, not in the questions, when you're asked a question over and over, she's also suggesting that if you're asking a lot of questions, it would be helpful if the other person would prioritize those questions. And which ones need to be addressed next time? What's a must do versus a nice to have? It's unlikely that a question asker can even necessarily answer that. A question asker is someone who sits back and listens, has ideas, and puts them out in questions. Sometimes those questions have absolutely nothing to do with the long-term outcome of your getting the work done. So you come to these people wanting feedback that helps you get the work done, and they respond to you as one academic to another. Part of these hidden curricula that we talk about. Another confusing tactic as an advisor uses to provide feedback is what she terms as the butterfly approach. She cites one small segment of the writing and says, you should be able to infer from there and figure everything out. It's interesting. Do you know why she calls it the butterfly approach? It's because of the 100 butterflies research, I'm going to guess, which is that big effects can be had from a butterfly if hundreds and hundreds of butterflies have added together to build that effect. And I think it comes from people who have studied animal behavior, and chimpanzees can learn to use a tool. And then if 100 chimpanzees on a particular location use that tool, it will somehow morph, and chimpanzees long places away will start to have the same effect. Preferences and orientation, I presume. Yes, I don't know why she calls it the butterfly effect, but that was a guess. It does mean, yeah. Yeah, you're hoping for, it's the same frustration. You as a student are hoping for guidance, and they, as people who are giving feedback, are not necessarily willing to give guidance. They may be willing to give you a small step along the path and see where the path leads you. So that's back to unlikely those standards are explicit. Okay, what are we going to do with these? I'm going to go through each kind and then have some comments about them. So single statements, do this, don't do this. And then we'll look at some examples, and you can give me some examples from your work. So the first thing is do this, don't do that. Well, you need to take ownership. On one hand, you want to do what they say you're going to do, but you also want to track what they tell you to do in a book somewhere else so that you can look for patterns in that tracking. So let's take Adrienne's person. She may give you a small segment, but if you were to track all the small segments she gives, you might see or have a conversation with somebody else who really knows this person or knows these how these things work. They might see a pattern in those tracks that could lead you to the suggestion you wish she had just made out loud. If you are told to do something, you might, when you take ownership and find out whether it's something you want to do, you might ask them, if you can't figure out why it's better than the other way, do it, but come back later and ask about it. What was the great improvement from X to Y? I don't see it. To me, X and Y are the same thing. So what am I missing? Also, ask the person who's giving you directions if they're trying to help you avoid a future issue. What do they see coming? I think this is the biggest non-communication thing that I see in reviewers' comments. Most of the time, a student passes me something that they're wanting some help with, and I ask for the reviewers' comments, and I don't disagree with the reviewers' comments. But what I see is that they didn't tie all their comments together for the student. So they are actually pretty concerned about this student's ability to build an argument, or this student's ability to be specific, or something that is kind of one of the big overarching problems that we see students having, or to coherently build a case, or to tie it always back to the purpose, or to not ramble, or there's a number of things. And if you see a lot of comments together frequently, they do point towards a bigger issue. And as I said, you either can ask the person, or if you don't have that relationship with them, you can ask somebody else who can kind of help you look for the patterns. They may see coming, oh, if she does X, Y, and Z right now, it's going to end up being this problem later. But they don't want to tell you about the problem. They just want to help you avoid it. Now, what can you do? I think the biggest thing you can do, and you should probably do it if you can at the start of a relationship. Unfortunately, people who talk about these things are usually later on in a relationship. But find an award-winning model that you really like. Somebody's finished work that won something. Some piece of work they can agree with you is really good, substantial work. And then look at that for examples of what the reviewer's comments might have led you to do. So did this person do whatever? Is it a good argument, to use that one again? And then look for how they put in, what is an argument? They look for how they put an argument in it. That may solve your problem. You may understand more by taking the reviewer's comments not to your work, but to somebody else's work first. And then your critical analysis will help you understand. But if it doesn't help you understand, and your reviewer and you have agreed that this is a good model, then take the model in and say, can you help me see where this person did that? Where does that show up? How does that show? And if they don't have it in the one that you've agreed to, maybe they'll give you an example from somebody else that shows you. What it does is, without being confrontive or defensive, you have held them to a standard to help you figure it out. Now let's see what's going on in the chat. Let's go back to the very beginning, where we probably need to administer a personality test on our advisors. I have to say, not a personality test, but if you get to choose your advisor, the smartest thing you can do is ask other people who've had them. Advisors should have references like others, and if you don't get good references, you should go on. People choose advisors for very ad hoc reasons. I know I did. I think most people do. I keep a detailed supervisor meeting as setting out what was discussed and agreed upon, actions arising. So I have seen that model in business, in doctors of business. I've had some doctors of business come back to me with a detailed meeting notes and setting out was agreed upon and advising, and that certainly keeps the forward motion very detailed. I've agreed to do this and circulate it to all attendees for agreement, or if not for agreement, at least for them to realize that you're doing what you said you were going to do, and if they didn't pay that much attention later, they were in trouble. So led to email discussions about what was really said. Actually, that's not bad, Helena. If you have email discussions about what was really said, you may circumvent a problem with following directions where you think they said something they didn't think they were saying. I think of the humble part. Earlier in this conversation, Adrian mentioned that we have to be humble. I think the humble part on all sides, although you may not get it from the professor's side, but the humble part is we all have to realize our words don't mean to others what we think they mean. And it's just true. It's true for every supervisor in a business, and it's true for every academic with a student. So you obviously have a group of people who what was really said may not be what is being heard. And I think both sides should listen to that. Jane says she follows up a meeting with what she perceives or supervisor has suggested and what we agreed on. By framing it myself, it helps me take control of what was agreed to. Okay, so you are all feeding back to them. This is what I think I heard. That's step number 3 on the simplistic following directions. And again, you may look to some outside thing like an award-winning model to even carry it a step further. And then we have, it's only helpful when the direction didn't change for next time. Actually, you know, if you have it and you fed it back and you say, this is what I'm going to do, you have a track record, and you can go back and say, you know, we agreed upon this, and now it's being told to do this. I don't mind, but I really need to understand what wasn't seen then that got me going the wrong direction, and why this course change is so imperative and how it wasn't seen before. It's a gentle way of holding other people accountable for the directions they give. And as a student wanting to take responsibility within a university structure of not taking 15 years to finish, if you're working with people who do frequently change direction and you have that kind of record keeping, then it allows you to go to other people and say, this is frustrating to me. Look at these changes of direction. What might be done? And that can be another level of keeping things moving forward. Remember, especially if you're in the United States and you've gone through proposal, once you're through proposal, you have a document that is of where you would have the ability to litigate. Thank heavens very few people want to do that, but you could litigate if they make you try to change too much away from that document. So there's some places in every university has complaint structures. Every university has mediation structures. And sometimes you can save a lot of trouble by just being really clear that you have strong forces and you understand when things are going too far awry. Adrian says that her advisor's exceptional master's course instructor, when he got to know her, completely different style when it comes to doctoral advisement. Isn't that interesting? So philosophically, she believes that doctoral students are on their own and that master's students still need a bit of a step-by-step instruction. Fascinating. Maybe we should all ask our doctoral people what is their philosophy about doctoral work. What's a good model is sometimes tricky. It is. If it's won an award, it's less tricky. And teaching and supervising are very different skills. Okay, seems like together we have done a good job of looking at these kind of statements. Let's see if we can move. So if they ask you questions, you need to understand, do they have a concern? Can they voice that concern? If that would be helpful. Do you have a concern here? Can you voice it as a concern? That would help me more than a question helps me. Are you naturally, you have to notice, do they only ask questions? Are they always the devil's advocate? If you take a class from them, you'll have teachers sometimes like that too. They always teach through asking questions. If they are that kind of a person, you can't tell whether they're just asking a question or they want to hone your defense ability. Are they convinced by your argument or where you are going? Just ask them. You know, you've asked these questions, and I wonder under that, are you convinced by my argument or where my study is going? Or are you asking these questions and does it come out of you not being convinced with a bigger issue? So if so, let's get into those concerns and evolve questions that help me understand that. Let's look at directives. Read them again, as I said before, over, right next to each other, not separated through a document, but literally cut and pasted into one document, and then look for patterns. Ask for a list of the concerns they might have about the quality of your work. And what do they wish you could do that you aren't yet accomplishing? That's a great question. If you can help them, different people think in terms of the steps we're on, and then other people think of in terms of the umbrella. If they give you an umbrella and you need steps, figure out how to ask for steps. If they give you steps and you can't figure out where they're going, then you need the umbrella. There's different ways to respond. And Adrian, remember in our Adrian just said that for those of you watching by recording, that it sometimes feels like her advisor is aiming to shoot her down. Now remember, that may be true. I can't speak to that. But shooting down could have two positive intentions. One positive intention is that she's trying to help you hone the skill of defending your arguments. So if you're into final defense and somebody says something that is shooting down one of your ideas, then what you do in final defense with that is you say, that's interesting. And yes, I consider that, or I didn't consider that, and I didn't go this way because. And then that's a defense. That's what you're doing. You're defending your idea. The other thing is to remember that when it feels like being shot down, it also could be that the test is new to us and has triggered in us our insecurity. And most of us pattern insecurity in whether or not we're safe, that they're not trying to shoot us down in the same place. So it could be that we're emotionally responding that way when it isn't that intention at all. Or it could be that that intention actually has a higher aim to it. Or it could just be that the person is somewhat of a jerk, and she's honing our skills in making our own bulletproof armor. I think that seems right to me, Adrian, because of your comment about the butterfly approach. It seems to me like philosophically, this is a person honing you to be bulletproof when you stand in front of a committee as an academic going for tenure or something. Because tenure track is brutal. Okay, response to a lack of a clear playlist. Do the model final document critique is contained at the beginning. Okay, so response to a clear playlist. You don't know where you're going. They're not helpful for you to figure out where you're going very practically. On any university.doctoralnet site or main.doctoralnet site, for those of you who are individuals, members, there is under your account, your on-demand webinars, and there are 2 webinars, beginning with the end in mind for doctors and beginning with the end in mind for masters. Do those things. They will help you find the model. They will help you find the playlist. Also, the book that I wrote, that's name is escaping me at the moment, is a clear playlist about how you get through these systems. Okay, so then when you do that, you are unpacking several models and you're looking at them strategically, and you're looking for the differences, and you're looking for what makes them great. And then go to your reviewer if you need to and explicitly share that exercise. I've done this. This is how I've taken it apart. This is what I see now from this. Can you help me have a conversation about what you're not seeing in my work? Because I'm confused after getting your comments. So I went back to my models. I found these examples. They did these things. I'm doing those things. So what am I still missing? That is a halfway bulletproof response. You're not completely defending like you would in a final defense, but you're showing that you've taken the initiative, you've figured things out, you've looked at it from a critical point of view, and you still don't get it. So Adrian is pointing out that bulletproof with impeccable logicality and reasoning. So that you can follow. In final defense, you say, yes, that's interesting. Yes, I thought about doing X, Y, or Z that you want me to do, but I decided not to do it because, and then you step by step logically lay out why you did it the way you did it. If you can do that, you will not usually be called to do something different. That's a secret of final defense. And if anybody's going close to final defense, for heaven's sakes, watch the Surviving Your Final Defense video, also in the on-demands, because it gives you a whole lot of these tricks. Okay, I just want to take some examples from reviewers. If you have some reviewers' examples from your own documents, please put them up in the chat. And these are all from somebody who said, I think you need to identify the main purpose of the research as supporting the development of, or main purpose of the research. And then you go through. So this is a, what is this? This is a request for specificity. What will tend to happen is students will just say the main purpose of my research is, but they don't see the overarching thing that they're being asked to be more specific. I think it might be worth adding a short commentary under each research question. Oh, I wanted really, so here this person was asked to do something which is not done. This person was asked to write a short commentary under each research question, saying which part of their research addressed that particular question. Sounds like a good idea, except it isn't done. And other people on the committee would be going, what is this commentary under each research question? So a better solution that got to the same idea was writing a paragraph under all the research questions that talked about where these portions were generally referred to in the final document. Perfectly normal for you, the writer, to tell you, the reader, where they can find stuff. Not always, or hardly ever, appropriate for you to, as the writer, completely break away from kind of the norm of how things are done, because that will drive other people on your committee crazy. So better not to do that. I'm not sure about this section. Do you do this, or do you do that? And if you do this, you'll need to do that. Okay, so his was specifically talking about a particular kind of psychology, but so I'm not sure about this section is a nice way of saying he's a little confused. And then the question is one of consistency. Are you consistently pointing this out or not? That is the single biggest problem all documents have at the end. Are your themes consistent? Are you telling a cogent story? Do you know your golden threads, as we call them? And he's really, another way of putting this is asking if positive psychology really is a golden thread, and if so, is it everywhere it needs to be? It's a really good question, but you can see that maybe the way it stated, you could just look at it as, I'll tell him this right here. And then finally, same reviewer, same document. Your review clearly highlights some important considerations for care based on the evidence base. I think it would be really good to highlight some of the information it doesn't provide. In other words, put your outliers in. And then finally, do the gaps on the next page answer the above comment? Isn't this another way to talk about gaps? And then the after part is actually what the student wrote. So this is a particularly good reviewer. He really cares about this student finishing in a particularly contentious committee situation. So he did a brilliant job of everything being reviewed. But even now, even with that, you see that some of these comments are, they're just hard to follow the directions. And that's our topic. We have some other comments come up. Completing the IRB protocol was an excellent exercise. It is an excellent exercise, and it's one clink of the way of how you're doing what you're doing. And when it's reviewed by somebody not from your field, you get more perspective. Yeah, that's excellent. That when these, I tend to follow and work with the students who are having the most difficulty, naturally, because the ones who aren't having difficulty only use us for webinars or they come flying through. The ones who are really having difficulty, we get to know rather well. And what's consistent, and so we don't, the vast majority of students go through much quicker because they have reviewers who don't comment or they're not out to make big changes. But some of these other things, couple of overarching points here. One is that everybody gets sometimes confused by reviewers' comments. Sometimes it's very hard to know what to do next. And the other thing is they almost always impact us some way emotionally, and we have to unpack that. Now, I want to take the last few minutes, and I'll probably run over a little bit today. I'll talk about dynamics of committees. Again, I get to hear the horror stories, so I don't want this to just feel like every committee is like this. Some committees work fairly well. I sit on many committees. I'm an outside reviewer, and I think by and large, people come to a committee, they want the student to finish, they want the document to get somewhat better, but if it has a big problem, they'll focus on the big problem and make them do that. If it has a lot of small problems, they might discuss those smaller problems and then come up with a fairly short list of what needs to be addressed that they all agree upon. But they're trying to work together, and they're trying to not negatively impact graduation. However, that is not always the case. And when it doesn't happen, it tends to not happen because of two possible things that I've seen and heard students talk about. One is that somebody is an outside dynamic of the group, and that person has some kind of power issues with the group. So in the one that is that I read you the comments from, in his Viva, and the outside examiner was somebody who had just made a pretty big name for himself in the field, and the rest of the committee wasn't ready or interested in arguing with him when he made suggestions. And he was not the kind of reviewer who worked within the document, but he was the kind of reviewer that went in and said, this isn't the way I do it, so therefore you must have done it wrong. There are people in academia who think if you don't do it my way, you've done it wrong. They're really short-sighted, because anybody who knows this very much knows that there's an art form here, and there's a gazillion ways we get the same job done. If anybody on your committee has that attitude and they have enough leadership, the others may just cave and let them run with it. It's unfortunate. In that case, I think the biggest help I have seen is somebody getting an outside helper, either a coach or the graduate studies dean, or in one case that I know of, they threatened to go to the ombudsman, and they were given a mediator because they had a viable complaint. And then when the university had a mediator involved, they listened to the mediator, and the mediator was not, the students still had to run through amazing hoops to get it done, but they took away the possibility they weren't going to graduate. So those are worst case scenarios. Most of the time, you don't know when you're putting these things together how important dynamics are. So to the extent you have any opportunity to figure out the dynamics of your people before you actually hire them on for good, it's a good idea. Adrienne mentioned earlier today that she thought maybe you should do a Myers-Briggs with all of your people. You want them to be on your side enough that they aren't going to make you chase your tail just for this wonderful word rigor. They're going to bring it, your work will be of a decent standard, and they will have crafted it, because if you look at the world of dissertations, there's some stuff out there that you cannot believe ever graduated. And there's others that don't. So that's my 2 cents on this one. Please, those in the room, take an extra minute and tell me, is that useful? Do you want more about committees? Do you have questions about committees? If so, I'll take a few more minutes. And you don't want to fall foul of internal politics, which you may not be aware of at the start and may change over the course of the years you're working. You don't want them to know each other too much. You want them to respect each other. You don't want any one of them to seem like they just wrote the hottest new book and therefore everything they say is right. You want them to work together in the goal of helping you make your work better, but not of you. This should be a group of people that are peers working together. This should be more like peer review than it should be like your biggest test. The Good Viva, a great video. She sent it on. The Good Viva. Let me tell you a story from a professor's point of view. I was at a university a couple months ago talking about the Viva, and I walked up. I was in a building I didn't know, and another professor walked me up to the room I was in, and on the way he said, "Oh, that's my favorite topic, Vivas." He was an engineering prof, and he had just had a Viva with a student. And what had happened, and this is a beautiful image for you to keep in mind, they all got into talking the engineering of the student's work, not from a point of view of did you do this and you didn't do that, but from a point of view of we all love engineering. How does this work? What if you did this? Could you do this with that? And they literally laid out a piece of paper in the middle of the table, and the different people were drawing on the paper, suggesting, well, you could do this over here, and how would that work? And no, I did a project like that, and it didn't work out. It did this over here. It was a joint sharing of people with mutual interests because they all liked and were interested in advancing their world. That is a perfect Viva. You will feel energized from that. You will leave excited to be launched into your field. A lot of them in the social sciences aren't quite so that, but they at least aren't contentious. And they tell the student as many good things about their work as they tell them things they might consider. And they launch them out with a congratulations, Dr. So-and-so kind of answer. So, is it good? I just want to say, as you're telling me, if you have last questions or you're ready to go, I ran on a few extra minutes on the slides, which are up. There's a few things that led to this discussion that I reviewed. And then there's 3 resources on Doctoral Net that are useful to this conversation. Critical reading, writing, thinking, and analysis. Develop skills in technical reading, reading strategies, and a letter to all but dissertation students from a student who had graduated about what she experienced in the results and discussion chapters. Supervisor who likes to be in control and is also intimidated by the expertise of the committee. I have someone else I'm working with right now. It's the same thing. And at the final stage, that supervisor all of a sudden started to show her teeth and make her do stuff she had never mentioned before. So doesn't always. Argumentation series, also a great resource, and we have it lots of ways. So what's new? Coming April 1st. We have a new thing for everybody. April 1st, we'll roll out our new site, our new way of working, our new thought process for working. Your site, this is like half of it put in 2 different places because, of course, it's long and skinny and you couldn't see it. But you will notice that phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 have gone away. They've moved into phase maps that you can find over to the right. Everything's organized now in topics. You can have the snippets. So if you like short videos, you'll have the snippets will be in kind of a Netflix-like environment on the control panel, but also available, as are the resources. And then up at the top, left-hand corner, you can barely see it on the slide. Everything's organized into your most favorite search terms. So if you like to watch videos, you can see all the videos. If you like checklists, you can see all the checklists. A lot of the things that you've always loved about what we did, like the assessments, self-assessments, will still be there. The stuff at the bottom is the opt-ins and box sets are still there, as long as your motivational quotes are still changing and being good. But in the meantime, you'll also get some other kinds of things, and it just thinks differently. We've basically changed the way the sites think, hopefully more in tune with how you think, so that you'll find things more easily, and you'll appreciate the full range of professional development background things that you get. Anything else? We good to go? You've been wonderful. And very appreciative of you understanding how important this topic was. I hope it's useful. I hope the slides help you remember when you've got this. What was that? I hope the steps go through. So Liz, thanks for your comment. Next up, if you're doing qualitative work, our group today is talking about qualitative research. Why does it take so long? And we start that in another 8 minutes. Good. I'm glad. Excellent. My pleasure always to do this kind of deep thinking about how the whole system here works. So I'll see some of you in a few minutes. And meanwhile, I hope you all have a wonderful day, week, month until we see you again. Look for the new site on April 1st.